It's a kind of rebel. His preface shows that it's kind of rebel against the nature of the university system at the moment, the nature of teaching learning process at the moment. The rebels were always at the margin to begin with, to an extent that the sociology, Lucknow School of Sociology, I kept exploring if they had the capacity and guts to acknowledge their project in the mainstream social science. I realized that they did not have that much. I mean, they always, whenever they wrote official articles, they never mentioned about their perspective. That remained within the perspective of celebrated dawns of the knowledge tradition. I remember a professor of mine whom I really consider as my mentor, and he really influenced a number of people of many generations in Delhi University, taught for several decades in Delhi University, who decided to came from US to teach here and remain very close to the movement of the ordinary people, that is the radical left movement. Once he told me that he is a survivor in academics. And I did not really like this statement. I asked him, why are you saying that? And he kept explaining that he was, academics for him was politics. It was softer choice. He wanted to be in hardcore movement, but he didn't have that capacity. So therefore he thought academics is that for him. But over the years, over the decades, it is realized that academia is not really acknowledging his contribution that way. So probably that was the reason. But I could understand this statement later on when another professor, who I was working with him and we were writing some concept note, and then he wanted to review his paragraph and said that when people would read this, they should know that I'm the writer, so it should be slightly extraordinary. So I would understand. Then I understood what was the problem. Like a professor called Professor Randhir Singh, whom a lot of people may not be knowing here, again a legendary professor, who spoke in a conference in the first half. And during the tea, somebody was saying, "Oh, yehi Randhir Singh hai. Ye to koi khas baat nahi bol rahe hain. Bahut ordinary baatein bol rahe hain." Then in the second half, he had to speak, and he said that in the first half, I spoke what people can understand. But in the second half, I will speak something that nobody can understand to establish my academic credentials. So I think this is what is this world doing and why it is happening. And that is what I see in this book as Dev's response to. That is, in this post-colonial scholarship, we find a very peculiar conflict. And that's a bit psychoanalytic actually. That is, and no, none of us is free from this, I guess. That is, the disjunction between being, thinking, and knowing. I think I would put Dev's celebration of this ordinary in this extraordinary way is reclaiming these interconnections. We think that our knowledge is not about our thinking. It is about the thinking which is already available in the domain of knowledge. And therefore we are expert of Derrida, Foucault and all that. We are not philosophers ourselves. We are actually teaching history of philosophy instead of philosophy. We never trained our students in philosophizing. We never trained our students in theorizing. We trained our students in the history of philosophy, history of theory. But there is a colonial context where knowledge, what we consider as knowledge, domain knowledge, is very disjointed from our thinking. And our thinking is disjointed from our being. I think when Dev is saying that we have to celebrate this ordinary, that is about that our being itself has to be subject of thinking. And that is the knowing. Probably at one stage, I remember my guide, Neera Chandok, wrote a book where she used first person. And her book was returned by Oxford saying that you can't write your book in the first person. But this was 1980s. And then by Thanks to postmodernism, that first-person narrative has become an accepted way of telling about social sciences. So I think this book is about reclaiming this interconnects. So I think this book I will put in the frame of politics of knowledge, a struggle of a post-colonial intellectual to claim its own space. That there is a space that is there, which I must claim for myself. My experience is authentic, my knowledge of my own being in the world and my own being in itself could be authentic, and I want to kind of design that. I would like to have a dig here. Isn't writing itself an extraordinary thing? I mean, I find it so difficult. Earlier I thought it's my shortcoming. Now I think it's my strength that I can't write. I don't want to write. I mean, I'm ridiculed by my friends that you don't write. Everybody comes and tells me, you don't write, you speak so nice things, but you don't write. I had a friend in JNU, not a friend actually, I came to know very late of him, called Vidrohi. Vidrohi was a poet in JNU. And he was really Vidrohi in true sense of the term. I don't know how many of you know him. He was not allowed to appear in his MA exam, as he said that I will not write, I will only speak. And there was a hegemony of written, so much of hegemony of the written word that he was finally rejected. And then he chose not to move out from JNU. But he had this withdrawal in his mind. And his two lines I used to quote when I came to JNU, that दिन भर पढ़ना, रात भर लिखना, जिंदगी है क्या कोई परियोजना. Admired Vidrohi and settled with this idea that my life is not a pariyojana. Let me live the way I. So writing itself is a very extraordinary thing, Dev. And I think you have extraordinary command on the art of writing, which you have learned. I don't know how, but by the way, I think this tension between ordinary and extraordinary, whether ordinary and extraordinary is in continuum. And something maybe seem to be very ordinary today, tomorrow somebody might say it's very extraordinary. So you may be considered as an ordinary teacher today, but if things decline further, tomorrow you will be considered as a great teacher. I mean, I consider myself a very ordinary teacher. I have been considering myself a very ordinary teacher compared to my own teachers. But tomorrow, if things would decline, universities would decline further, they might consider me as an extraordinary. So this is a continuum that happens. But there's a tension, and there's a psychic tension between us in our mind, that we want to be distinguished and acknowledge our distinction by our peer group. That sometimes transforms us into a being who fails to remain ordinary being. And that tension is always there in human being, and particularly in our times. It's much more as we have this mirror image projected by society. And in the neoliberal society, this projection is so strong that the entire wall is fixed with mirrors. And when we enter in the room, we see our our images in different ways, which terrorize us. We want to have nice body, we want to have nice dress, we want to have nice hair, we want to have so many things. Every year when I get that form on my computer, I feel terrorized to write about myself, what have I achieved. I never keep any record of where I have spoken, where I have not spoken, or what I have written. But you really have to pin down, and then at the end of the day you think, oh, I have not really worked a lot according to that. But that was not what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to remain a teacher, teaching, talking to the students, giving a lot of time to them, which is not acknowledged. In the system, the ordinary teacher is humiliated all the time. Ordinary teacher is not anymore respected in the system. I think Dev's rebel is that. I mean, we know of Avijit Pathak, the strong opinions about him. Some people think he is not scholarly. Some people think he's a great teacher. Some people think being a great teacher is not the mandate that JNU has. I think Dev's book has a very, very interesting take on the way we need to see cinema and read novels. That, I think, is my latest concern. I'm reading Michel Houellebecq's novels, a French novelist, and Dev has given me this entry point in those novels now, which actually unfolds that further for me. I'm a great fan. He's a very controversial novelist. I think the entire intellectual world in France is against him, as he talks about sexuality, as he talks about violence and so many things in a very open way. But I think he actually celebrates the ordinariness of life and the authenticity of living. Argument on yoga was very interesting, that this the merging of ordinary and extraordinary, one can see in the yoga philosophy. And Gandhi, I would bring in, who has this capacity to transform the extraordinary into ordinary and ordinary into extraordinary. For instance, the statement that he gives, that whenever you have to judge whether you are right or not wrong, you just have to ask to yourself that your act is favoring the person who is at the bottom or not. Mention of Roy Bhaskar attracted me. I am a great admirer of his philosophy. I think he has produced a philosophy for the future generation. In fact, he was a friend of mine, not a friend of mine. I was a great admirer, and we had a chance to meet. So when he was writing his meta-reality, in the subtitle we were discussing, and my suggestion was that call it future philosophy for the future. He said, no, I want to call it philosophy for present. I still think it is a philosophy for future of human beings. And an Australian philosopher who was, again, part of his critical realist movement told me that Roy Bhaskar was always carrying that wounded psyche. And that is why his book, Odyssey of Soul, became very controversial among the Western intellectuals. That only reflects the problems that the post-colonial intellectuals are facing, of which this book is a representative text, I guess. I mean, if I need to analyze, I need to do a psychoanalysis of post-colonial intellectuals, I would treat this book as one of my resource materials.